All right, guys. Today we're going to talk about Unit 6, Lesson 4, congruent triangles. So, today you'll have these notes you'll fill out, and then there's a homework 4 assignment that goes with it. This will be the assignment for Thursday the 14th and Friday the 15th. So, talking about congruent triangles here, it says congruent triangles have the same shape and size. So, those were our first two blanks. So this means that all corresponding parts, the angles and sides, are congruent. So we're going to start talking a lot about corresponding parts here. We get a lot of stuff from our congruency statement. So our next point here, when triangles are congruent, we can write a congruency statement. So it told me right here that triangle ABC was congruent to triangle DEF. That means the angles and sides are going to be congruent up here. So you can see right here, AB, it had one tick mark. It was congruent to DE. That's what we can get from this congruency statement. See how AB was the first two letters listed, DE was the second two letters listed, or was the first two listed over here as well. Those are a corresponding side. AB being congruent to DE. Another one here, you can see BC. BC was the last two letters here. So BC was congruent to EF. So now we took the last two. You can see over here how they're marked. Both have two tick marks. And then AC, the first and last letter, was congruent to DF. And once again, that was marked over here. The corresponding angles were congruent. So A was the first one listed. A and D matched up. B and E, and C and F. So we're going to be using this congruency statement a lot to determine what are our corresponding angles and sides. It says a valid congruency statement must match all corresponding angles and sides. All right, CPCTC. What is that? That is saying that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. That may not mean a ton to us right now, but we will start using that quite a bit when we're doing our proofs and stuff like that. If we know two triangles are congruent, then we know that each pair of corresponding angles are also congruent. So we would go through, you can either be given a diagram and you can take the information by the tick marks, by the semicircles to determine what angles are congruent, or if they gave me a congruency statement, we can take that information as I kind of showed you earlier. All right, let's look at some examples. It says directions, list all congruent angles and sides given the congruency statement. So now we're working strictly off that congruency statement. We want to find our congruent angles, find our congruent sides. Don't let it be any harder than it is. It's really as easy as it looks. For our congruent angles, you just match them up. Come from this congruency statement. J and P were both the first letters listed here. That is a pair of congruent angles. So angle J is congruent to angle P. Over here on the next one, K and Q. Second one listed in that congruency statement. That is a pair of congruent angles. And last but not least, angle L and angle R. And then we'll do the same thing with the sides. Over here, JK. First two letters in the congruency statement. So what are the first two letters in the second part of that congruency statement? JK would be congruent to PQ. Another side I could would be KL. What would KL be congruent to? Looking at the statement, KL is the last two letters. It would be congruent to QR. And then the last one's usually your first and last letter. And JL is going to be congruent to PR. So all this information we got came strictly off of our congruency statement over here. So I want you to try number 2, looking at that same thing. You're probably gonna have to pause your screen real quick in order to try it, and then come back and see if you get the same thing I do. So when I would be working this, coming straight from the congruency statement, I'll do my angles first. W is the first letter listed. What does that match with over here? It's going to be my E. Angle W is congruent to angle E. My next corresponding angle, X, is the second letter listed here. What does that correspond with? F. So X was congruent to F. And my last one would be Y is congruent to G. Usually the angles are pretty easy. Sometimes the sides can give people fits, but just find the pattern over here. For my first side, I'm going to find the first two letters, WX. What is WX going to be congruent with? It was the first two. Working strictly off the statement, it would be congruent to EF. My next side I would make would be XY. What is that going to be congruent to? XY was the last two. Same thing here, FG. My last congruent side, if I went WY, go EG. So hopefully so far so good. But like I said, really just working right here off this congruency statement. The only other way you could get this information would be if they gave you a diagram. You can work off the diagram, find your corresponding angles and sides. So let's look at number 3. It said given that KPM is congruent to AYC, complete each of the following statements. So it asked me first about KM. We'll come over to this congruency statement. KM was the first and the third letter in my congruency statement. Follow that same pattern. So what would KM be congruent to? It would be congruent to AC. Looking at B, it says CY. So CY, they went from the third letter to the second. So I'm going to follow the same pattern. MP. The next one they asked me about is PQ. Or excuse me, PK. YA. So hopefully you're starting to see how easy this really is. Looking at D, they asked me about angle Y. Y was the middle one listed right here, so its corresponding angle is going to be the same place over here. So we would be looking for angle P. Angle K is the first one listed in that congruency statement. It's going to be congruent to angle A. And then here they want to know about angle AYC. AYC, it's just how they listed it, so we're going to keep it the same way. That would be congruent to angle KPM. Almost done. Last one they asked me about, or one of the last ones, MPK. So they went from the third letter to the second to the first. They basically just went backwards. We can follow that same pattern. They went MPK. We're going to go YCA. And for the last one here, YAC, it went from the second to the first to the third. We're going to do the same thing here. We're going to go P, K, N. All right, on the back. So now we're actually going to be applying this. So there's a few different things you can do here when they give you a congruency statement. You can either always just work off of the congruency statement, or you could also come down and label this down here. So if they told me that STW was congruent to BFN, I would know that ST over here would be congruent to BF, the first two listed. TW, so TW over here would be congruent to FN. Now, you wouldn't always have to do this. If you just wanted to work from the congruency statements back and forth, that'll work. I just kind of like the way that this sets everything up. And my last one, SW, was my first and third. Same thing. It's going to be congruent to B and N. So I put 3 tick marks to represent that those 3 are congruent. Do the same thing with the angles, S and B, T and F, and W and N. So them filling all this out, they want to know what BN was congruent to. So looking at my marks here, BN had 3 tick marks. It was congruent to WS, or like I said up here, come back to your congruency statement. BN, first and third, SW. So if SW is equal to 9, BN is equal to 9 centimeters. TW, so looking right here, TW was my second and third. That's congruent to FN. So looking down here, I did not have a distance for TW, but I do know that FN is equal to 14. If those are congruent, TW is going to be equal to 14. Wants to know what BF is. BF is congruent to ST. Well, over here they told me ST was equal to 17. So what's BF going to be equal to? 17 centimeters. So really you can see there's not a lot of math to be done here. It's really just working off this congruency statement and matching up corresponding angles and sides. So they want to know what angle W is. Angle W was congruent to angle N. So obviously they're congruent there. Angle W is going to be equal to 82 degrees. Angle B is going to be congruent to angle S. So the first one's listed up here. So B is going to be equal to 67 degrees. Last but not least, did ask about F. Well, we know that angle F is congruent to angle T, but I don't know either one of those. But what do I know? I know 2 of the sides of a triangle, or I know 2 of the angles of a triangle. So how can I solve for the missing one? Hopefully we can still recall that we can use the triangle sum theorem. Subtract 67, subtract 82. Or working this one individually. Let's see, I would subtract those. I would find that angle F is equal to 31. And if angle F is equal to 31, angle T would also be equal to 31. So I want you to try number 5. Give you a second to pause the video. All right, looking at this one, I'm not even going to label that. I'm not going to label the congruency statement down here. I'm just going to work from it and see where we get from there. So one thing I do know, they have told me right here that HG and HJ are congruent. They told me that by the tick mark, so I know that this side over here is going to be 27 feet as well. and then I think we'll be able to solve our problem. So the first thing they asked me about is GJ. Well, GJ is going to be congruent to XZ. I'm looking over here. They told me XZ was equal to 18. If they're congruent, GJ is also equal to 18 feet. The next one they asked me about is XY. Well, XY was the first and second letter in this congruency statement. Follow that pattern, GH. And over here, I know that GH is equal to 27. Since they're congruent, XY is equal to 27. And last but not least, they asked me about ZY. That was the third and second. Follow the same pattern, JH. Over here, I know that JH was equal to 27, so ZY is going to be equal to 27 feet as well. Now, over here for D, this is where it may get a little tricky on the angles. They asked me what angle H is. Well, I know that H is corresponding with Y. Well, I knew that angle Y was 38, so angle H is 38 degrees. Now, here's where it may have got tricky. Remember, this triangle has two congruent sides. It's an isosceles triangle, which means these two angles are congruent. So I know that 38 plus two angles that are going to be the same down here are going to add up to 180. So if I was trying to solve for that, I would take 180, subtract 38, get 142 degrees. So these two angles should add up to 142 degrees. They're also going to be congruent. So would I take that 142, get my answer, divide that by 2, or find that both of these angles are 71 degrees. So they asked me about angle Z. Z was corresponding with J. So Z is going to be 71 degrees. Down here as well. All right, asked me about J. We just said that one was 71 degrees. All right, getting close. Looking down below, look at number 7. Or look at number 6, excuse me. It says, given that UVW is congruent to TSR, find the values of X, Y, and Z. So what we're going to be doing, remember this congruency statement tells me what sides are congruent. So if they're congruent, I'm going to be able to set those equal to solve for our missing variables. So let's start with X. X right here was part of UV. So what segment is going to be congruent to UV? It's the first two listed, so TS. So I'm going to start here. UV is equal to TS. We would plug in what we know. UV is equal to 12x minus 7. TS is equal to 53. Combining like terms, add 7, add 7. 12x equals 60. Divide by 12, divide by 12, x equals 5. If you want to make sure that was right, you can plug it back into this equation right here and make sure we get what is an answer. 53. All right, the next one I want to solve for is Y. Y was over here. It was part of the segment RS. So RS was the third and second in this congruency statement. So it's going to be congruent to WV. So let's go ahead and start there. RS is congruent to WV. Plugging in what I know. 5Y minus 33 is equal to 57. Combine like terms, I would add 33, add 33. 5Y is equal to 90. Divide by 5, divide by 5, Y equals 18. Last but not least, Z. Z was a part of UW down here. So looking at my congruency statement, UW, TR. So UW is congruent to TR. And then I would plug in their values. 3Z plus 14 is equal to 50. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Subtract 14, 3Z is equal to 36. Divide by 3, Z equals 12. All right. Look at number 7. This is the last one I'll do with you particularly. I'll go ahead and talk about 8 and 9 real quick. Once again, guys, just because they don't give you a diagram, nothing changes. You'll still get your congruency statements. D, E, and JK are still congruent. E, F, and KL, so on and so forth. Just because I'm trying to not make this video crazy long, I'm not going to work those, but I will tell you, if you did, you should get X is equal to 6 and Y is equal to 13 for number 8. And for number 9, you should get X is equal to 7 and Y is equal to 4. All right, so we'll run through this last problem, and I will let y'all get to your assignment. So once again, it's having me solve for values of for the variables of X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to start with X. X was up here in the equation for angle H. So what would angle H be congruent to? It's the second letter listed. It's going to be congruent to N. So angle H is congruent to angle N. Plugging in what I know, H is equal to 6x minus 27. That's equal to 115. Combining like terms, I would add 29, 144 is equal to 6x. Divide by 6. X is equal to 24. Once again, if you wanted to prove that that is right, you could plug it back into this equation and make sure whenever you multiply 6 times 24 and subtract 29, you better get that 115. So the next thing they wanted me to solve for was y. So that works with angle F. What's the congruent angle with angle F? It would be S. Angle F is congruent to angle S. Plug in what I know. Well, I do not know what angle S is particularly over here, but how could I solve for it? I just solved up here and found the X value for H. So if I wanted to plug that back in, what do we say we should get? 115. So if that is 115, how can I solve for angle S? Hopefully, remember we do the triangle sum. 180 minus 115 minus 36 is going to tell you that angle S over here is equal to 29 degrees. So now can I set up an equation? Yes, F over here, 3y minus 1 is equal to 29 degrees. Add 1, 3y equals 30. Divide by 3, y is equal to 10. All right, almost done. Last one I'm going to solve for is Z. Z is a part of angle C. What's my corresponding angle with C? It was the first one listed. It would be P. So plug in my equations. For C, I'm going to plug in 4Z minus 32. That's equal to angle P, which is equal to 36. Combine like terms. 4Z is equal to 36 plus 32 68 divided by 4 divided by 4. Z would be equal to 17. So I know a lot of that's new information for us today. Hopefully it's not too bad. Just remember that congruency statement. We can grab everything we need from that right there. So if this ended up being real confusing to you for some crazy reason, you may want to try and look up videos over the congruency statement because if you don't understand how this right here is giving me all this information, just from dragging it from there, then yeah, this is going to be a pretty hard lesson for us to grasp. So I've been getting a few emails from y'all. Hopefully everything's still going good. Y'all are saying the videos are helping. Hopefully that continues to be the case. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Looks like we're going to be virtual now through the Tuesday after Martin Luther King, but hopefully we'll be back in the classroom soon after that. So like I said, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. Hope everything's going good. Hope you have a great rest of the week.